Mark, you were working in a recording studio in London in 1985 when a pretty big star walked in. What can you still remember?
Well, it was a big deal for me, to know that Bowie was coming in, and it was a big deal for the guys that I was working for, the two producers, Alan Winstanley and Clive Langer, who'd produced Madness and Elvis Costello and Dexy's Midnight Runners, but nobody as big as Bowie. So the reason Bowie was coming in was to record music for the film Absolute Beginners, and they were my bosses were contracted to do all the music for the whole movie. So when Bowie was coming in for the first time, we were all standing around, and I could see that my bosses were nervous as well. And we were on an kind of industrial estate in London, and with a big parking lot, and we were just looking out the window, and I was expecting kind of a limousine, probably two limousines with a whole entourage of people, and just a cab. A typical London cab pulled up, and out jumped Mr. Bowie, and when he came in the room, when he first entered, he seemed really quite shy, and he appeared to be smaller than he did for the rest of the time, and it was as if he was trying to put you at ease by not being an intimidating big star. He kind of sounded more Cockney, like the way he spoke was more casual, and then he sort of said, "Oh, my name's David Bowie," and as if we didn't know, and then I realized after about half an hour, he'd kind of changed into a more sophisticated, the Bowie that you know as a musician and you've seen on interviews and stuff. So I think he did have this knack of like adjusting to get what he wanted from people, and to make people to know that people were going to be intimidated. So I'm going to be a bit less intimidating, or accommodating to people in a way. So it was really fascinating, and it was really exciting, to have somebody like him.
I believe. Yeah. And you had the mixing job.
Well, I was sort of graduating from being the assistant engineer, which in England, in studios, meant you were making the tea, basically. So there was no kind of on-the-job training. Nobody sat you down and taught you how to do things. You basically made the tea, and you sat in the back of the room, and you watched the engineer and the producer. And it was a great education, really. Okay. And so I was, during Absolute Beginners, I switched, sometimes I was the assistant and sometimes I was the engineer. So I wasn't completely hands-on on Bowie's stuff necessarily. Well, I did get an engineering credit on two or three songs, I think. That's Motivation was definitely one of them. But I think there was at least another one that I did get the engineering credit. And I did get the engineering credit on Dancing in the Street too, which I was pretty happy about. It was a year and one day after I started in studios that I worked Bowie and Jagger on the same day.
Yeah. How old have you been then?
I was 26, I think, which was quite late. I started quite late. A lot of people would start my job straight from school. Yeah. They'd get a job as the T-boy in the studio, and they would spend a long time before they became an engineer. But I'd been playing in bands and playing drums, and I got into the studio, and I knew as soon as I got in the studio, I was like, wow, this is what I want to do. Yeah. And it felt really important to me to learn as fast as possible, because I think at 25 you're a lot more hungry to get started than you are at like 16, and you're hanging out with rock stars. And my bosses were constantly throwing me in the deep end. They would, there was a point that some of the songs on Absolute Beginners were big bands with sort of 9 brass players, drums, percussion, and the film company had installed a bar in the studio because the jazz musicians need a bar more than any other kind of musician, apparently. So, and my bosses were sort of taking drinks as well. And I remember at one point, I'm sitting at the desk and panicking because people are asking me questions. I can't hear myself. I'm thinking, where's that microphone? And you know, there's 24 different microphones up or something. And then I turn around and I go, do you think it sounds okay? And my boss, Alan, who was the engineer, he was just asleep. He just had his head on the sofa at the back. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm on my own. You know, there's no backup here. So it was nerve-wracking and really exciting at the same time, you know. Yeah, it was a great experience.
And with Bowie, did you had sweaty, trembling hands?
Especially on Dancing in the Street, when it came to do the vocals, I was sitting, you know, right in the middle of the desk, and the singers, right, you know, David and Mick, each taking it in turns to do their vocal, were right in front of me, talking, you know, and it was me putting into record and talking to them, and like, okay. And I was literally, sweat was running down the back of my neck. You know, I was soaking my shirt, I think. I believe. A lot of nervous energy.
How did the recording with the voice imitations come about?
Well, Bowie, who I was so impressed with, because he was filming during the day and coming to our studio at night to do recordings, and you know, he'd be up at like 4 o'clock in the morning, you know, and then makeup and then shooting and shoot all day, come to the studio, and I think, you know, it was about 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night we were doing the vocals for Absolute Beginners, and it was just my bosses, Alan and Clive, and myself in the control room, and David singing, and at one point he sang something, and either Alan or Clive said, "Oh, the way you sang it reminded me of who did he say? Oh, Springsteen." And then Bowie said, "Oh, how would he do that?" But somehow, thinking about it, I got that on recording, I think. So I must have sensed something was going to happen and put a cassette in record, because I managed to capture most of that, I think. Yeah. So something must have made me think, I better capture this, because we wouldn't normally be recording the dialogue between the studio and the engineers. So I put the cassette in, which meant that the microphone we were capturing everything. Yeah. Anyway, then he said, "Oh, let me just roll back. Let me just for fun or something, you know. Yeah. Let me try it." And he instantly rewrote the lyric, which I didn't realize until later. It was like, wow, how did he do that? He's singing the lyrics for Absolute Beginners, and then he goes back and he sings in sounding like Springsteen, but also Springsteen-style lyrics, which were great lyrics. And lyrics that probably Springsteen would probably think, wow, I wish I'd thought of that. It was great American imagery about cars and completely different from the original song. Yeah. And then he was thinking, somebody mentioned another, like Iggy or something, and that's how he then went, oh yeah, how would Iggy do it? So he just ran it a few times, and each time you do it in a different voice. And it was, you know, I just felt like, wow, I'm a really lucky person to be here to witness that.
Yeah. Maybe we should listen to that cassette now. Mm-hmm.
When the fire broke out on the Rio Grande, put my foot to the board and she ate up the sand with a horse of the South track tailing behind, a fire that aims to please. When the fires broke out on the Rio Grande, left nothing standing but the smell of the land, and the hot caps that burnt through the skin of your hand, left nothing at all but the sound of a rock and roll band.
I'm going to give you somebody else now, just because I feel like it. Keep that last one.
When the fires broke out on the Rio Grande, put my foot to the board and see it of the sand, with a horse in the South track tailing behind, a fire that aims to please. When the fire broke out on the Rio Grande, left nothing standing but the smell of land, and the hubcaps that burnt the skies of your hand, nothing left at all but the sound of a rock and roll band.
Okay, I'm just fucking about now.
When the fires broke out on the Rio Grande, put my foot to the board and she ate up the sand, with the horse of the South track trailing behind, the fire that aims to bleed. When the fire broke out on the Rio Grande, left nothing standing but the smell of the land, and hubcaps that burned through the skin of your hand, but nothing left at all but the sound of a rock and roll band.
Oh yeah.
When the fire broke out on the Rio Grande, put my foot to the board and she ate up the sand, with a horse of the South track tailing behind, the fire that aims to please. When the fire broke out on the Rio Grande, left nothing standing but the smell of the land, hubcaps that burn through the skin of your hand. Hard luck.
No, there's nothing. It's real hard, Lou. How would he do this? Christ. Okay, all right, nearly. Okay, yes.
When the fires broke out on the Rio Grande, put my foot to the boards and she ate up the sand, with the horse of the South track tailing behind, a fire that aims to blaze. When the fires broke out on the Rio Grande, left nothing standing but the smell of the land, and hubcaps that burns through the skin of your hand, nothing left at all but the sound of a rock and roll band.
Oh dear, Lou Reed. Okay, Iggy then. Iggy. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
When the fire broke out on the Rio Grande, put my foot to the board and she ate up the sand, with the horse of the South track tailing behind, fire that aims to please. When the fire broke out on the Rio Grande, left nothing standing but the smell of the land, and hubcaps of birth through the skin of your hand, nothing left at all but the sound of a rock and roll band.
Difficulty somewhere between all of them. I could never. No, couldn't even get near to him. It's,
my foot to the boards and she beat up the sand with the force of the stout that tail behind. Fire that aims to bleed, and the fire broke out on the Rio Grande. Left nothing standing, the smell of the land. Up caps that burnt through the skin of your hands. Nothing left at all, the sound of the rock and roll.
That's it. Good night, night.
Weren't you afraid of getting into trouble with the Bowie estate because of the secret recording?
Well, when I put it online, you mean?
Yeah.
I was a little bit, but part of me felt like, well, you know, who's going to really complain? You know, like he's just died, and I felt like I really needed to share it with people because it was such a great piece to show his personality, of what he was like, and people were, you know, like I was affected by Bowie dying more than just about anybody, you know, since John Lennon probably. Yeah. You know, he had the most impact, I think, of anybody from most people I know in the business, I think, or, you know, just general music fans. And so I felt like I have something that people haven't heard before, and it felt wrong for me to just keep it to myself, and I just thought, okay, I'm just going to put it up there because people need to hear this, and it did get a lot of attention, and there was one guy who kept saying, it's fake, it's completely fake, he's obviously talking rubbish. It was obviously not fake, and that was quite funny. But one of my bosses I saw a few years ago, and he said, I wasn't so happy when you did that because I felt that that was a private moment. And I said, I know it was, but it's such a nice, it's not like a bad, you know, it's not showing him a bad light at all. It's showing how incredible he was to be able to write a lyric instantly, which is absolutely mind-blowing. Yeah. And his humour, and, you know, it's just, that's what he was like. He was not aloof or, you know, as an assistant or, you know, the lower cast in the studio, he didn't treat you differently. You know, he was a really respectful guy. You know, he never, you know, never gave you a bad vibe, really. And he was so professional and such a great singer. You know, all the time that the band were rehearsing for a take to record the band, he would sing along, and every single one of his sing-alongs could be the mastered vocal. But then he was very particular about recording the vocal, though, so he wouldn't sing it all the way through. He would say, okay, let's do the first line, and quite often he'd have the Walkman with the demo and the headphones, and he'd go, oh, let me just listen to how I sang it on the demo. And then he'd listen to it, okay, let's do the first line. And then he'd stop and go, okay, let me listen to that. Okay, let's do the next line. And I thought that was really strange because, like, he's flawless. Like, he's one of the best singers I've ever experienced, like, consistently great. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I was always curious as to why he felt the need to be very almost clinical about the approach. Even when we did Dancing in the Street, which we were limited on time to get the whole thing finished because they had to shoot the video. When it came to the vocals, Mick Jagger went in and sang twice through, just straight through, brilliant. We used the first take, which was absolutely fantastic. Mm-hmm. And then Bowie went in and he did the one line at a time thing, which I was really quite surprised at. But it sounds great though. either way.
Did you have time to socialize with David? And what can you tell you about working with him?
Yeah, I didn't really didn't socialize him. I mean, I remember one time on a Sunday. He came in on a Sunday, and everything was shut on a Sunday, you know, in London at those times. And he was like, "Oh, I really want to fancy a beer." And I said, "I've got some beer. I live up the road." And he goes, "Oh, would you mind?" So I went and got Bowie a beer from my fridge, which was and he was very grateful. And I thought, wow, it's not very often you go and get Bowie a beer from the fridge.
Mark, thank you.
That's it.
Fantastic
All
story.
this way.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.